Chapter 2. Monolithic Terror. The Astralis surged, engines straining as they pushed the craft around the newly revealed entity. Behind them, the vast, angry glow of the solar flare loomed. Amanda sat still at the ship's deck window, her mind refusing to fully process what she had just seen. What was left of Earth hung in the black void of space like a memory. Its surface, once vibrant with life, now twisted and shattered. But that was only the beginning of their terror. From the wreckage of their home, something impossible had emerged. A creature rose from the ashes of Earth, beyond comprehension. It had no form, at least not one that could be easily defined. A vast, shifting mass of vacuumous blackness. It seemed to absorb light, absorbing it as it coalesced into grotesque shape. At its center, a group of lidless eyes slowly focused, like many stars gazing into eternity. Kurt sat next to Amanda, his face pale and drawn. He stared at the screen in abject horror, his hands limp at his sides, unresponsive to the alarms blaring around them. Amanda's voice cracked as she spoke, a thin thread of sound in the overwhelming silence of space. "Kurt, we need to..." But he wasn't responding. His eyes were fixed on the creature, his breath shallow, barely registering the chaos erupting around them. Amanda wanted to scream at him, to shake him out of whatever trance had overtaken him. But her own mind was also on the edge of collapse. There was no framework, no logic that could rationalize what was happening. The Earth was gone, not just destroyed, but erased by an otherworldly entity, something that had used their planet like a cocoon, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. A cold primal terror gripped Amanda's soul as the thing shifted, its massive, featureless body rippling with unfathomable energy. It wasn't moving in any conventional sense. There was no locomotion, no movement of limbs or wings. It simply existed, and in doing so, it seemed to warp the very fabric of space around it. Tendrils of darkness, like enormous blackened waves, unfolded from its core, spiraling outward in all directions, probing, seeking. And one of those tendrils, if that's what they were, extended towards the Astralis. "Kurt!" Amanda's voice sharpened, snapping him out of his stupor. His eyes darted toward her with wild fear, but he seemed to register the urgency in her tone. "Amanda, what is that?" His voice filled with confusion and panic. "I don't know," she replied, "but it's coming for us." She slammed the ship's throttle forward, pushing the Astralis away from the creature. The tendril of darkness was moving impossibly fast, stretching across space like an ink stain spreading across a piece of paper. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Amanda shouted, her hands gripping the control panel so tight that the plastic began to creak and bend. No matter how fast they were moving, the tendril closed in, reaching for them with cold, alien intent. Then, for a brief moment, everything went still. The tendril stopped, hovering just beyond the ship, like a predator waiting for its prey. Amanda could feel it, an oppressive, suffocating presence pressing against the walls of the Astralis. It was studying them, its colossal, unfathomable mind, concentrating on them. It didn't communicate in any sense that could be understood, but there was an overwhelming sense of awareness, like being caught in the gaze of a god, cruel and all-powerful. "We need to get out of here," Kurt whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm working on it," Amanda replied, her fingers darting across the console as she tried to find some way, any way, out of the creature's reach. But deep down, she knew the truth. There was no escaping this. Not really. Not from something this vast, this seemingly ancient. The creature's eyes shifted slightly, and the air inside the Astralis seemed to grow heavier, as though the very space around them was bending under the weight of the creature's gaze. And then, without warning, the tendril struck. Like a child playing with a toy in the bath, not knowing its true strength. The ship bucked violently as the tendril made contact, a low, resonant hum filling the cabin. The hull groaned under the strain, metal creaking as if it were about to buckle. Amanda gripped her seat, her knuckles white, as the ship's systems screamed in protest. Alarms blared, lights flickered as they both erratically poked at every control to escape. Before she could finish her thought on what to do next, the tendril withdrew just as quickly as it had struck, retreating back towards the monolithic creature. For a moment, silence descended upon the cabin once more, broken only by the soft whirring of the ship's systems stabilizing. The silence was short-lived. As the tendril recoiled, something was left behind, clinging to the outer hull of the Astralis, a black, writhing mass, almost liquid in its movement. It slithered across the ship's exterior, spreading like an infection. They could see it on the external cameras, a dark stain creeping across the hull. "What is that?" Kurt asked, his voice desperate. "I don't know," Amanda whispered, "but it's spreading." The ship's sensors were going haywire. Whatever that thing was, it was infecting their systems, corrupting their readings, and disrupting their navigation. Lights flickered on and off as it continued to examine the ship. "We need to get rid of it," Kurt shouted, his voice rising in panic. "It's going to tear the ship apart and kill us!" Amanda's mind raced. How do you deal with a cosmic entity that had just hatched from the ruin of your planet? She suddenly had an idea. "Activate the number 2 life pod system," she said to Kurt, who was seated at the control panel, her voice grim. "I don't know what you have in mind, but it has to be better than the nothing I had planned," Kurt said. The mass of whatever was on the ship had gathered itself back together in a massing pool of black sludge, working its way around the ship, looking for a weak spot to enter. Just as it made its way toward the back, over the number 2 life pod, Amanda shouted, "Release the pod now!" With a shunk, the door exploded outward away from the ship, and the pod shot into the bleak, dark space, carrying the would-be intruder with it. The two looked at each other and sighed in disbelief, but the relief was only momentary. They quickly refocused on the creature that the intruder spawned from. Amanda wondered, what hope did merely 2 astronauts have? The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then, as if bored with its game, the creature began to shift once more. The amorphous figure that had emerged from the wreckage of the Earth began to change. It was unfolding, expanding outward like a living cathedral of black stone and shadow reaching toward distant stars. In its vastness, it began to block out the sun itself. The creature was moving, not toward them, but outward, expanding. It had used the sun's flare to break free, and now it seemed to be leaving. Where it was going, neither could say. But the sheer size of it, the weight of it, was unbearable. It appeared to be looking for something. As it stretched and drifted outward, expanding away, its presence remained, like a scar on reality itself. Amanda sat hard in her seat, her body numb. Kurt sat beside her, his hand over his mouth trembling. The Earth was gone. Everything that they had ever known was gone. Their family, friends, lives, gone. But they were still alive, for now. "What do we do?" Kurt asked, his voice small and still. Amanda didn't have an answer. Even if they were the last humans left in the universe, the instinct to survive remained. However, deep down, she knew that whatever had just awakened wasn't finished, and neither were they.